The letter came on a cold morning, bold letters stamped with HOA authority. A fine so huge, it could crush a family for life. $250,000. For living on my own land, they thought I was powerless. They thought I would break. But what they didn't know is that the ground beneath their homes already belonged to me. And when I told them the truth, the entire neighborhood froze, because in that moment, everything changed. Welcome to HOA Chaos, where the suburbs turn into battlefields. And today, you'll hear my story. My name's Daniel. I'm a rancher living in a quiet American suburb, a place where the grass looks perfect. But the rules cut deeper than barbed wire. I've lived here for years, raised cattle, fixed tractors, never bothering anyone. But then the HOA came for me. And what happened next? No one in my neighborhood will ever forget. I never cared about rules. I cared about my land, my cattle, my peace. But in my neighborhood, rules were like weapons. The HOA wrote them down in thick books, and they swung those books harder than any hammer. The president of our HOA was a woman named Claire. Perfect smile, perfect hair, perfect little suits that made her look important. But everyone knew she was dangerous. She didn't smile with her eyes, and when she looked at you, it felt like she was measuring your worth. And finding you too small, I kept to myself. I didn't go to the HOA meetings. I didn't complain about mailboxes or lawn height. I just worked my ranch, fed my cows, repaired my old tractor that broke down every other week. Neighbors drove by and gave me polite waves, but I knew they whispered behind closed doors. He doesn't fit in. He doesn't follow the rules. He's going to drag down our property values. I heard it all. I just didn't care. Until that morning. The letter came in a bright white envelope, big red stamp across the front. Notice of violation. I thought it was some silly warning, maybe about my fence or my chickens, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. They weren't asking for $50 or even $500. The number was bigger than I had ever seen on paper, $250,000. I read it 3 times before I believed it. They listed violation after violation. Barn too large, tractors not approved, animals not in harmony with community design. Even my gravel driveway was illegal. Each one stacked like bricks until the total became a mountain I could never climb. I laughed at first. It had to be a mistake, but deep down, I knew Claire was behind it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch with my old shotgun across my lap. The moon lit up the fields. My cows wandered quietly in the grass, but my mind was on fire. How could they do this to me? How could anyone believe I owed $250,000 for simply living the way I always had? The next morning, it got worse. I saw flashing lights at the end of the road, police cars, one after another. Pulling up like it was a raid, Claire stepped out of her SUV with a clipboard in hand. She wore that same smile, thin, cold. Her heels clicked against the pavement as if she owned the world. Behind her, neighbors gathered, some in pajamas, some holding coffee mugs. They watched like it was a reality show, waiting for me to lose everything. "Daniel," she said, "your violations have reached a serious level. You must pay immediately, or the HOA will pursue legal action to seize your property." I stared at her. The audacity in her voice almost made me laugh, but my blood boiled instead. "Pay what?" I asked. "You already know," she said, waving the paper in my face. $250,000. I wanted to tear the paper in half. I wanted to shout until the cows scattered. But instead, I stood there, calm on the outside, because I knew something she didn't know. You see, years ago, when my grandfather passed away, he left me this land, not just my little house, not just my barn. He left me the deeds to acres and acres of ground, land that the HOA had been built on, houses, streets, even the board's office. All of it sat on my inheritance, and while they wasted their time writing rules about mailbox colors, I held the one piece of paper that made their entire world fragile, the deed. I never flaunted it. I never needed to, but now, watching Claire scream and threaten me, I realized something. She was playing checkers, and I had the chessboard, but I couldn't reveal it yet, not too soon, not without letting her show the whole world just how far she was willing to go, so I let her talk. I let her yell. I let the neighbors whisper about how I was finished, and inside, I smiled because I knew a storm was coming, and I wasn't the one who'd be struck down by lightning. That night, another letter came. This one said they were escalating enforcement. That phrase made me laugh out loud. Escalating enforcement? Over my cows? Over my driveway? It sounded like they were preparing for war, and maybe they were, because the next morning, I saw construction equipment roll onto the hill, an excavator digging near the mansion they were building. Claire's dream project, the crown jewel of her neighborhood. She thought it proved her power, but every time I looked at it, I thought of the papers locked in my safe, the papers with my grandfather's name, and my name right below his, the papers that could turn her dream into dust. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but I walked my land with new eyes, every fence post, every blade of grass. It wasn't just property, it was leverage, and leverage is more powerful than money. Still, the pressure grew. Every neighbor looked at me differently. Some pitied me, some hated me, but none of them knew the truth. Not yet. The days after that first confrontation felt strange. I could feel the shift in the air every time I stepped outside. It was like the whole neighborhood had been given a script, and every line was written against me. At first, it was little things. A note slipped into Mao. Oh, I mailbox. We expect better. No signature. No explanation. Just those 3 words staring back at me. Then it became more obvious. Neighbors who once waved now turned their backs. Kids who used to run across my fields were told to stay away. Even the mailman looked nervous, dropping envelopes at my gate. I started counting the violations. Each day a new paper arrived. $100 for the barn door being the wrong shade of red, $75 for the cattle fence leaning at an angle, $200 because my porch light didn't match community standards. The numbers stacked higher and higher until the total sat heavy in my mind like a storm cloud. And still, I said nothing about the deed. One night, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the stack of violation letters piled in front of me. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from anger. This wasn't about harmony. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Claire wanted me out. She wanted to make an example of me, so every other homeowner would bow down in silence. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted my land for herself. The next HOA meeting was announced. I never went before, but this time, curiosity got the better of me. When I walked into the community hall, the room went silent. Dozens of chairs lined up in perfect rows, every one of them filled with neighbors I'd known for years, people I'd shared coffee with, people who once borrowed my tools, now glaring at me like I was the villain. At the front, Claire sat like a queen on her throne, clipboard in one hand, microphone in the other. She smiled as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we are here to discuss the ongoing violations of Daniel and the danger he poses to the integrity of our community." Her words echoed through the room. Danger? I was a farmer, a man who fixed tractors and raised cattle. How was I a danger? She read each violation out loud. Her voice dripping with false sweetness. Barn too tall, fence too old, driveway gravel not approved. It went on until the crowd murmured like a restless hive. Then she dropped the number. Total fines owed, $250,000. Gasps filled the room. Some neighbors shook their heads. Others clapped quietly as if justice had been served. I stood there, hands in my pockets, calm on the outside, but inside, my blood boiled. After the meeting, I walked outside. The night was heavy, streetlights buzzing above. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Daniel," a soft voice whispered. It was Mrs. Harris, an older woman who lived 3 houses down. She'd always been kind, always brought pies during the holidays. She looked nervous, eyes darting left and right. "They're going too far," she said. "I've been on this street for 20 years, and I've never seen them do this to anyone." I nodded. But before I could reply, she pressed a folded note into my hand. "Be careful," she whispered, then hurried away into the dark. When I opened the note under my porch light, my heart skipped. It wasn't a warning. It was a copy of something from the county office. Land maps, deed transfers, signatures, Proof that Claire had been trying to buy up property around the neighborhood, piece by piece, and my land, my block, was the crown jewel. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor, thinking about my grandfather, thinking about the papers locked in my safe. Had he known this would happen? Had he known one day I'd be fighting not just for land, but for dignity? The more I thought, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. This was about every homeowner who lived under fear of that clipboard. Every family fined for a garden gnome. Every single mom harassed over a cracked driveway. Every elderly man bullied because his paint color wasn't modern enough. If I stayed quiet, she'd win. If I revealed the deed too soon, she might twist it into something ugly. But if I waited, if I let her push harder, she would destroy herself. The next week, they escalated again. This time, the HOA sent a crew to measure. In my land, orange flags popped up in my grass. Spray paint marked my fence posts. They said it was for compliance evaluation. But I knew better. It was intimidation, a show of force, like soldiers marking enemy territory. Neighbors stood on porches whispering as they watched. Children asked their parents why men with clipboards were walking through my field. And Claire stood at the edge of the road, smiling. Always smiling. I decided to fight back. But not with shouting, not with threats, with silence. I mowed my lawn at midnight. Just within the allowed hours, I repainted my barn door the exact shade listed in their rule book. I fixed my fence post, down to the last inch, every single violation they threw at me. I corrected with surgical precision, and yet, the letters kept coming. $500 for suspicious activity, $300 because my tractor disturbed the neighborhood harmony. It was madness, and the more they tried to bury me, the more I realized something important. They weren't afraid of my violations. They were afraid of me. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee. The sunrise painted the sky gold, but what I saw in my driveway made the coffee taste bitter. A notice nailed to my fence. Not just a fine, a threat of foreclosure. They actually thought they could take my land. I laughed so hard the cows looked up from the pasture, because in that moment, I finally knew how this game would end. The notice of foreclosure sat nailed to my fence, the wood around it split from the hammer, red letters screaming at me like a death sentence. I stood there with my coffee in hand, and I laughed. The sound startled a crow on the power line, because while the HOA thought they were tightening a noose, they were only tying it around their own necks. But I didn't rush. No, I let them believe they were winning. The days after that notice were heavy. Neighbors avoided me even more. Cars slowed when they passed. My property. Kids pressed their faces against windows, like they were watching the last days of a man about to lose everything. Even the pastor from the little church nearby knocked on my door. He spoke gently, offering prayers, saying maybe I should settle with the HOA. Sometimes peace is better than pride, he told me. I smiled, thanked him. But inside I thought, peace built on fear is no peace at all. That night, I unlocked the old safe in my study. The air smelled of iron and dust. Inside were the papers my grandfather left me. Yellowed edges, ink fading, but still powerful as fire. The deed, the survey maps, the county records that stretched back decades. I spread them out on the table, every street, every cul-de-sac, every shining white house, all sitting on land with my name printed in black and white. I whispered to the empty room, "You built your kingdom on my soil." The next HOA meeting came fast, and this time, I didn't sit in the back. I walked straight to the front row. Every eye followed me, some filled with pity, others with hate, Claire's with nothing but hunger. She began her speech the same way, cold, polished, rehearsed. Daniel continues to violate the standards of our community. She listed fines like a grocery receipt, $250 for unsightly equipment, $400 for disturbance of neighborhood tranquility, even $50 because my cows smelled unpleasant. The crowd chuckled at that last one. They laughed at me. As if I were less than them, I sat still, jaw tight, waiting. When the microphone passed for questions, I didn't take it. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, and I said just one thing. "Are you sure this is your land to govern?" The room went silent. Claire's face froze. The neighbors looked confused. "What do you mean?" one man asked from the back. But I didn't answer. I just walked out, leaving whispers and suspicion behind me. That small sentence did more damage than I expected. The next day, two neighbors approached me quietly. One was Mr. Collins, a retired soldier who lived across the street. He looked me in the eye and said, "Is it true? Do you know something we don't?" I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just smiled and told him. "Sometimes the ground tells a story no one wants to hear." He nodded, but I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, and doubt spreads faster than any fire. By the end of the week, the HOA sent another letter. This time, it wasn't just a fine, it was an order to appear in court. Claire was done playing notes and threats. She wanted to drag me into the system she thought she controlled, a courtroom where her lawyer friends could grind me into dust. But courtrooms run on one thing only: paperwork, and I had the only paperwork that mattered, the night before the court date. I sat at my kitchen table again, the same spot where I once stared at a mountain of fines. But this time, the table was clear except for one folder, the folder with the deed inside. I ran my fingers across the paper, thinking of my grandfather, thinking of the years he worked this land with calloused hands and stubborn pride. He never trusted the polished smiles of people like Claire. And now, I understood why. I closed my eyes and made a promise to him. I won't let them take what you built. The morning came gray and wet. Rain fell soft across the fields as I dressed in my old brown jacket and hat. Neighbors lined the street as I walked to my truck. Some shook their heads, convinced I was doomed. Others looked curious, as if they sensed a storm about to break. Claire drove past in her shiny SUV, windows tinted, but I could still see her grin. She thought victory was already hers. But I held the folder tight against my chest, and I knew the truth. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy with perfume and paperwork. Claire sat at the front with her lawyer, whispering and smirking. She didn't even glance my way. Why would she? In her mind, I was finished. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The case began. Her lawyer painted me as a stubborn old fool, a man who refused to follow simple rules, a man destroying the beauty and value of the community, every word carefully chosen to make me sound guilty before I even spoke. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, folder in hand, and I said just one sentence to the judge. "Before we begin, I need to clarify who owns this land." Gasps filled the room. Claire's smile faltered for the first time. The judge leaned forward, curious. I placed the folder on the bench. "Your Honor, every street, every home, every office of this so-called HOA sits on property deeded to me by my grandfather. The association has been fining me for rules written on land that belongs to me." The courtroom erupted. Claire's face turned pale. Her lawyer scrambled, flipping papers, searching for a way to disprove what I had just said. But the judge, he looked at the documents, checked the stamps, the signatures, the dates, and then he looked back at Claire. "Is this true?" he asked. She stuttered, for the first time ever. "Well, the HOA operates under..." But the judge cut her off. "Not if you do not own the land you govern." That moment was sweeter than any victory I had ever tasted. Neighbors in the back gasped, some even whispered, "So that's what he meant." Claire sat frozen, her perfect smile gone, her mask cracked. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. The truth had been planted, and once the seed of doubt grows, it cannot be pulled out. I left the courthouse in silence. Rain had stopped. The air smelled of fresh earth. Neighbors stared as I walked past, some with awe, some with shame, but all of them knowing now. The game had changed. Claire avoided my eyes. She climbed into her SUV, slammed the door, and sped away without saying a word. That night, as I sat on my porch, shotgun across my lap, I thought about what had just happened. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. But the first crack had split the wall, and once a wall cracks, it always falls after the courthouse. I thought maybe things would calm down. I thought maybe the HOA would take the hint. But I was wrong. Claire wasn't the type to accept defeat, no. Not in public, not in front of neighbors who once saw her as queen of the block. The very next morning, another letter arrived. This one wasn't about fines, it was about community safety. They accused me of being a hostile threat. They said I intimidated neighbors with weapons. They claimed my presence endangered the harmony of the neighborhood. It was laughable, but it was also dangerous, because words like that, they spread like fire, and fire has a way of burning even the innocent. I started noticing cars slowing outside my gate, not just curious neighbors anymore, but strangers with clipboards, cameras, maybe private investigators, maybe people hired to find anything they could use against me. At night, I saw flashlights near my barn, footsteps crunching in the gravel. When I called out, no one answered. By the time I grabbed my shotgun and stepped outside, they were gone. They wanted me rattled. They wanted me to slip, but I didn't. A week later, I woke up to a spray-painted message across my fence. Get out. The letters dripped red in the morning sun. Neighbors passed by, pretending not to see, but I caught one boy staring, wide-eyed, pulling at his mother's hand. She dragged him away quickly, not daring to look at me. I fixed the fence myself, painted over the words, but deep down I knew this wasn't just about me and Claire anymore. It had become a neighborhood war. Still, I played my game. Revenge by compliance, every violation they threw at me. I answered perfectly, barn door repainted again. In the exact shade they listed, fence posts measured with a level until they stood straighter than the White House gates. Even my porch light replaced with the model they demanded. I gave them nothing to use, nothing to twist, nothing to prove I was in the wrong. And that's when Claire grew desperate. Still, I played my game. Revenge by compliance, every violation they threw at me. I answered perfectly. Barn door repainted again, in the exact shade they listed. Fence posts measured with a level until they stood straighter than the White House gates. Even my porch light replaced with the model they demanded. I gave them nothing to use, nothing to twist, nothing to prove I was in the wrong. And that's when Claire grew desperate. The HOA began holding emergency meetings. Always late at night, always without notice. Neighbors whispered about what was said. Some said they planned to push me out by force. Others said they wanted to bankrupt me with endless legal battles. But a few neighbors started to doubt Mr. Collins. The retired soldier walked over one evening. He leaned on my fence and said quietly, "I don't like what they're doing. I fought wars overseas, and now I see one happening right here in my street." He looked me dead in the eye. "If you need someone to back you up, you've got me." That meant more than he knew, because for the first time, I wasn't standing alone. But not everyone felt that way. The Harris family, once friendly, stopped talking to me entirely. I saw them cross the street to avoid passing my driveway. Their teenage son even shouted "troublemaker" one afternoon before slamming his door shut. It stung, not because I needed their approval, but because I realized how deep Claire's poison ran. She didn't just attack me with fines, she attacked me with isolation. Then came the strangest night of all. I was sitting on my porch when headlights cut across my yard. A car pulled up fast, braked hard, then reversed down the road without stopping. Something dropped out of the window. I walked over carefully. It was a letter, sealed in a plain white envelope. Inside was a single page, typed words, no signature. "Claire has been using HOA money for herself. Check the accounts." My heart raced. Could it be true? Could the queen herself be stealing from her own kingdom? It made sense. Her new SUV, her vacation she bragged about, her mansion project up on the hill. But I couldn't prove it yet. And without proof, it was just another rumor. Still, the seed was planted. And once seeds are planted, they grow. The next HOA meeting was different. Tension filled the room like smoke. Neighbors no longer laughed when Claire mocked me. Some folded their arms, some whispered to each other. Claire stood at the front, talking about protecting community values. But her voice didn't sound as strong as before. For the first time, cracks showed in her perfect mask. I raised my hand. She tried to skip over me. But the judge's words from court still rang in her ears. She had no choice but to let me speak. I stood slowly, and I said, "Funny thing about communities. They're built on trust. And once trust is broken, no amount of rules can save it." The room went quiet, Her face turned red. I didn't mention the letter, not yet, but the look in her eyes told me she knew exactly what I was hinting at. That night, the whispers spread faster than ever. Neighbors came to me quietly, asking if I had proof, asking if the rumors were real. I didn't answer. I let the silence do its work, because silence creates curiosity, and curiosity is deadlier than any fine. The next morning, another threat showed up in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't even subtle. If you don't leave, we'll make sure you regret it. No HOA letterhead, no signatures, just pure threat. But the timing was too perfect. It had Claire's fingerprints all over it. I held the letter up to the sun, and I smiled, because the more desperate they became, the closer I was to winning. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. What if the anonymous letter about her stealing was true? What if I could prove it? What if the entire HOA wasn't just corrupt, but rotten to the core? That idea kept me awake at night, made me dig through old boxes, made me think about the county records office, made me wonder how deep this rabbit hole went. One evening, as the sun set red across the fields, I watched the cows graze quietly, the same fields my grandfather once worked, the same soil the HOA tried to control, and I asked myself, how much longer can I play this game? How much longer until the whole block realizes the queen has no crown? The letter about Claire stealing from the HOA would not leave my mind. It sat heavy in my pocket like a secret weapon. But a weapon is only useful if you know when to strike. I could have marched into the next meeting and thrown it down on the table, but that would have been too easy, too quick, and quick victories never last. So instead, I waited, I watched, and I gathered. I started visiting the county records office in town. The clerks gave me funny looks at first, but I told them I was digging through family property files. That wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. I spent hours looking through papers, old tax documents, bank account summaries the HOA had filed, budgets, receipts. And there it was, buried in the numbers, a line that didn't fit. Money listed as community landscaping. But the checks were made out to Claire's personal account. I read it twice, then 3 times. It was there, in black and white. Proof she was stealing from the very people she pretended to protect, the same people she fined for cracked sidewalks and chipped paint, the same people she punished for flowers planted too close to the mailbox. That night I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the deed on one side, the stolen money proof on the other. 2 swords, both sharper than anything Claire could throw at me. I thought about my neighbors, the ones who avoided me now, the ones who looked at me with suspicion. They didn't know the truth yet, but when they did, everything would change. The next HOA meeting was packed, more people than I had ever seen crammed into that hall. Word had spread fast, whispers of corruption, and whispers of secrets, whispers about me. Claire walked in late. She wore a bright red suit, louder than her usual, maybe to show power, maybe to cover fear. Her smile stretched wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. She started the meeting with her usual voice, cold, sharp. She listed my violations again: barn too large, cows too loud, tractor too rusty. Neighbors chuckled nervously. But not like before. Something was different in the air. Suspicion had already entered the room when she was finished. I stood. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for her to hand me the microphone. I just spoke. You talk about harmony, about rules, about community. I paused, let my eyes sweep across the crowd. But what happens when the one enforcing the rules is breaking them herself? The room stirred. Whispers rose like a tide. Claire's face froze. She tried to laugh it off. What nonsense is this, Daniel? I held up the papers, county records, bank statements, receipts. Her name printed bold across the checks. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, neighbors standing from their chairs. Someone yelled, "Is this true, Claire?" Her face turned red, her lips trembled, but she couldn't answer. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Her perfect kingdom cracked in front of everyone. The queen had no crown. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just spoke, calm and steady. The same woman who fined me for my driveway used your money to build her mansion. The same woman who says my cows disturb the peace used your dues to buy her SUV. And you all let her do it. Because you were too busy measuring mailboxes and grass height." The silence after that was heavier than thunder. Everyone looked at her. Everyone realized the truth. Claire tried to fight back. She raised her voice, accused me of forging documents, called me a liar. But her words had no weight anymore. The neighbors weren't looking at me. They were looking at her, and they accused her styles. I didn't like what they saw. After the meeting, things shifted. Fast. Some neighbors came to my porch that night, apologizing, admitting they had believed her lies. Mr. Collins shook my hand and said, "Looks like the war's almost over." But not everyone reacted with kindness. The next morning, my mailbox was smashed. Cows spooked in the night by fireworks set off near my fence. Claire still had loyalists, people too blinded by pride to admit they'd been fooled. It didn't matter, because the tide had turned, and once the tide turns, no one can stop it. The following week was chaos. The HOA board scrambled, meetings canceled, emails flying, neighbors demanding answers, people shouting in the streets. I sat back and watched, silent, calm, holding the deed in one hand, the proof of theft in the other. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. But Claire, she wasn't done yet. She came to my property one evening, pulled right up in her SUV, got out in her heels, standing tall. She walked to the fence, stared at me like I was dirt. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think this little show will stop me?" I just looked at her, didn't answer, didn't move. Her eyes narrowed. "I built this neighborhood. People respect me. And you're just an old man with cows and dirt." I smiled, slow, quiet, and said, "Funny thing about dirt, it always swallows what doesn't belong." She stormed off, her SUV tires spitting gravel as she left. That night, I knew. She was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes were all I needed. The next HOA meeting wasn't held in the community hall. It was outside. Neighbors gathered in front of Claire's mansion in progress, the very place their money had been funneled. People shouted, demanded answers, signs were held up. "Where's our money? Resign. Enough is enough." Claire stood on the steps, trying to calm them, but her voice was drowned out by the anger of the crowd. I stood back, leaning on my truck, watching. Because sometimes, victory isn't about shouting the loudest, it's about letting truth echo louder than lies. The neighborhood was changing, before my eyes. The board that once controlled every flower and fence was now under siege. The same people who once laughed at me now demanded justice. And Claire, the woman who thought she owned everything, was watching it all crumble around her. After the protest in front of Claire's mansion, the neighborhood was never the same. The whispers had turned into shouts. The cracks had split into chasms. The queen's crown had fallen. But she still clawed to keep it. I thought maybe she would resign quietly, walk away before the whole block turned into a battlefield. But I should have known better. Claire didn't know how to lose. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He held a thick envelope. "Summons," he said. I opened it after he left. It was a lawsuit. Claire had filed against me personally, accusing me of harassment, defamation, trespassing on HOA property. The irony almost made me laugh. HOA property that sat on my land. But it wasn't funny. Court cases take time, money, energy. And she knew it. This wasn't about winning in court. This was about draining me dry. Neighbors were divided. Some came to my porch offering support. Others avoided me completely, still too afraid to choose sides. At the gas station one morning, a man I'd known for years muttered as he passed, "You're tearing this place apart." I wanted to tell him the truth, that the rot had started long before me, that I was only pulling back the curtain. But I stayed silent, because silence sometimes cuts deeper than any words. That night, another anonymous letter appeared on my porch, but this one was different. It was typed, but the edges were torn like it had been ripped from a larger stack. Inside were more records, bank statements, transfers, and one line that froze my blood. Payments to security services, paid from HOA funds, amounts too high to be anything simple. It clicked. The flashlights near my barn, the smash, Ed mailbox, the spray paint. She had been paying people to intimidate me. With their money, the next HOA meeting was chaos before it even began, people yelling in the parking lot. After the protest in front of Claire's mansion, the neighborhood was never the same. The whispers had turned into shouts, the cracks had split into chasms, the queen's crown had fallen. But she still clawed to keep it. I thought maybe she would resign quietly, walk away before the whole block turned into a battlefield. But I should have known better. Claire didn't know how to lose. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He held a thick envelope. "Summons," he said. I opened it after he left. It was a lawsuit. Claire had filed against me personally, accusing me of harassment, defamation, trespassing on HOA property. The irony almost made me laugh. HOA property that sat on my land. But it wasn't funny. Court cases take time, money, energy. And she knew it. This wasn't about winning in court. This was about draining me dry. Neighbors were divided. Some came to my porch offering support. Others avoided me completely. Still too afraid to choose sides. At the gas station one morning, a man I'd known for years muttered as he passed, "You're tearing this place apart." I wanted to tell him the truth, that the rot had started long before me, that I was only pulling back the curtain, but I stayed silent, because silence sometimes cuts deeper than any words. That night, another anonymous letter appeared on my porch, but this one was different. It was typed, but the edges were torn like it had been ripped from a larger stack. Inside were more records, bank statements, transfers, and one line that froze my blood: payments to security services, paid from HOA funds, amounts too high to be anything simple. It clicked, the flashlights near my barn, the smashed mailbox, the spray paint. She had been paying people to intimidate me with their money. The next HOA meeting was chaos before it even began. People yelling in the parking lot, board members arguing with each other, Claire trying to wave papers. And the air, her voice hoarse from shouting. I waited until the noise hit its peak. Then I stepped forward, and I laid the new records on the hood of a car where everyone could see. "This is where your dues are going," I said, "not to fix sidewalks, not to mow community lawns, but to hire thugs to scare me off my own land." The crowd roared. Some shouted at Claire, some shouted at me, but all of them knew the truth now. She wasn't just corrupt, she was dangerous. Claire screamed at me across the lot. "You forged those! You're lying!" But her voice cracked. For the first time, she didn't sound like a leader. She sounded like a cornered animal. Mr. Collins stepped beside me. His deep voice cut through the chaos. "I've seen intimidation before. I've fought it. And I'll tell you this. Only guilty people pay for shadows in the night." The crowd turned on her fully then. People who once clapped for her now demanded she step down. "Resign," they shouted. "Give us our money back. Enough is enough." But Claire didn't resign. Not yet. She doubled down, sent more letters, filed more paperwork, even tried to tow my tractor, claiming it was an abandoned vehicle. Every move she made only proved my point, that she was desperate, that she was grasping at control that was already gone. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday morning. I woke to the sound of engines outside, 3 trucks pulling up near my field, men in uniforms stepping out with tools and clipboards. I walked to the fence. "What's this?" I asked. One man cleared his throat nervously. "We've been ordered by the HOA to begin removal of non-compliant structures." He pointed at my barn, my grandfather's barn, the one that had stood longer than most houses in that neighborhood. I felt heat rise in my chest. But before I spoke, another voice cut in. It was Mr. Harris, the same man who once avoided me. He shouted from across the street, "You can't do that. That's his land. We all saw the deed." Other neighbors gathered, some with umbrellas, some standing in the rain. One by one, voices rose. "Leave him alone." "Enough, Claire. This is wrong." The workers looked at each other, uneasy. One shook his head. "Sorry, sir. We're not getting in the middle of this." They packed up their tools, climbed into their trucks, and drove away. Claire stood at the edge of the road, soaked in rain, her makeup streaked, her white cage, air flat. She screamed at the retreating trucks, screamed at the neighbors, screamed at me. But no one listened anymore. Her voice didn't carry power now. It carried only desperation. The board collapsed the following week. Half the members resigned, the other half vanished. No one wanted to be tied to her anymore. Claire tried to hold on, tried to declare herself acting president. But it was like a child playing queen with no subjects. Her words meant nothing. The county finally stepped in, investigations launched, bank accounts frozen, her mansion project halted overnight. The half-built frame stood on the hill like a skeleton, a monument to her greed. I sat on my porch through it all, watching, listening, silent. Neighbors came again, some to apologize, some to thank me. Kids played in the fields again. The fear that once hung heavy in the air was gone, replaced with something lighter, something freer. The HOA, the monster that ruled every flower and mailbox, was gone. But Claire, she disappeared too. Her mansion rotted unfinished. Her SUV sat abandoned for weeks before being towed. Some said she left town. Some said she was hiding from the law. I didn't care, because in the end, she lost the one thing she worshipped most: control. I thought about my grandfather a lot during those days, about his stubborn pride, his quiet strength. He must have known one day I would need that deed. That paper wasn't just land ownership. It was a shield, a sword, and a promise that no one could take what he built. I kept that promise. And now, as I sit on my porch with the cows grazing quietly, I wonder something. Not about Claire, not about the HOA, but about the people around me. They turned on me when it suited them, believed her lies, laughed at my pain, and only when the truth came out did they come back with apologies. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. The HOA was gone. The board dissolved like sugar in rain. The letters stopped coming. The fines vanished into nothing. The threats, the rules, the endless meetings, all gone overnight. At first, it felt unreal. Like waking from a long nightmare, I stepped outside each morning half expecting another notice nailed to my fence, but there was nothing, only the sound of cows in the pasture and birds in the trees. The neighbors were different too. They waved again. They stopped to talk at the mailbox. Some even brought pies, like they used to years ago, but their smiles carried a shadow, a guilt they couldn't wash away. They knew they had turned against me when it mattered most. They knew they had laughed while I stood alone. And now, every handshake, every thank you, felt like an apology they didn't know how to put into words. One afternoon, Mr. Collins came by. He leaned on the fence, looked out at the fields. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I told him. "The truth did it." He nodded. But then his eyes grew serious. "You'll never forget what they did, though, will you?" I didn't answer right away, because he was right. I could forgive, maybe, but forgetting, that was something else. And then there was Claire. She didn't just lose her crown, she lost everything. The county investigation found the proof I had uncovered: the embezzlement, the misuse of funds, the payments to security services. Neighbors testified. Board members turned on her to save themselves. Her name became poison. Her mansion project was seized. The frame stood there half-built, a skeleton on the hill, a monument to greed. Every time I drove by, I couldn't help but smile, because it wasn't my barn or my tractor that ruined the neighborhood's beauty. It was her dream. Rotting in plain sight. I heard she left town. Some said she sold what she could and disappeared. Others claimed she was fighting lawsuits in another state. I didn't care. She was gone, and that was enough. Life returned to normal, but not the same normal. A freer one. Kids played in the street without parents panicking over noise violations. Lawns grew a little wild, but no. One complained. Mailboxes leaned. Fences aged. Flowers bloomed in colors that never would have been approved before. It wasn't chaos. It was real life. Messy, beautiful, free. As for me, I went back to my work, feeding cattle, fixing tractors, walking the land my grandfather left me. But now, when I walked those fields, it felt different. Not just like land, not just like dirt, but like victory, like proof that sometimes the little guy wins. I sat on my porch most evenings, shotgun across my lap out of habit. Not because I feared another fight, but because it reminded me that peace is never given freely. It's defended. Sometimes. I'd catch neighbors staring at me from their driveways, their eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Respect, regret. Maybe both. I didn't rub it in, I didn't throw their betrayal in their faces, but I also didn't let them forget, because forgetting is how monsters like Claire rise again. Weeks later, the county held a vote whether or not to rebuild the HOA under new leadership. People debated for hours. Some said rules were needed. Others shouted they'd never give up freedom again. When my turn came to speak, I stood in the middle of the room, hands in my pockets, voice calm. You've all seen what happens when power is left unchecked. If you rebuild this thing, even with new faces, it will only grow back into the same monster. Do what you want, but I won't live under another HOA ever again. The room erupted in applause, and the vote passed. No HOA. Not now, not ever. For the first time in years, I breathed easy. The weight was gone. The fear was gone. The pettiness, the fines, the endless threats, gone. All that remained was the land, the cows, the porch, and me. But sometimes at night, when the wind moves through the grass, I hear echoes of the past, the slam of envelopes in my mailbox, the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement, the whispers of neighbors. Behind their curtains, the storm may be over, but the memory lingers, and maybe that's a good thing, because memories keep us sharp. They remind us what we fought for, and what we must never let happen again. So that's my story. How the HOA tried to fine me $250,000. How they thought they could bury me under rules and fear. How they thought they could break me. But in the end, I proved I owned their whole block, and the only thing that broke was their crown. Now let me ask you something. If you had been in my shoes, if your entire neighborhood turned against you while one powerful voice ruled with lies and greed, would you fight alone like I did? Or would you walk away and start fresh somewhere else? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes, the hardest question isn't how to fight. It's whether the fight is even worth it at all.